What price are you willing to pay for your own happiness at the expense of others? Can your grief blind you to the reality of the world around you? And if so, do you face it or seek escapism that can ultimately take your own life? Do you accept the truth, or do you drown yourself in lies and seek escapism? Tragedy is inevitable, but how will you allow it to define you, break you, and ultimately reshape you? When one falls, we continue. Not if, when, for those who come after.
Clair Obscur Expedition 33 asks the player these questions and touches on many topics such as grief and its many stages, the trolley problem, sacrificing of one for the many, selfishness versus selflessness, the will to power, der Wille zur Macht, versus the will to live, Wille zum Leben, and what it means to exist. Pulling heavily from Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche, and more, Clair Obscur tells a multi-layered story that is truly like an abyss that you stare into and that stares back at you. As it is a story so well written that you will find yourself contemplating it, the world, the characters, and yourself well after you have beaten the game. This story and themes analysis will cover spoilers, so if you have not completed the game, then do not continue onwards, as I want you to experience the game for yourself, and then come back.
Well, let's start with the main theme of the game, which is grief. Grief is universally devastating, with no definitive guidelines for coping. Everyone must learn independently, navigating pain uniquely. Some individuals, however, are unable to move beyond their grief, becoming trapped in an endless cycle of loss. When grief persists excessively or is overly intense, it can develop into a condition known as complicated grief, also referred to as a persistent complex bereavement disorder or prolonged grief disorder. While grief is a natural response to loss, complicated grief is characterized by persistent, intense mourning that significantly impairs a person's ability to function and resume their life. Unlike typical grief, when symptoms lessen over time, complicated grief can manifest in various ways, including persistent longing for the deceased, preoccupation with thoughts of the deceased, and difficulty accepting their death. Symptoms may include intense sorrow, rumination, avoidance of reality, numbness, detachment, bitterness, lack of purpose, and an inability to enjoy life or think positively about the deceased. Social isolation, depression, guilt, and feelings of worthlessness without the deceased are also very common. If left unaddressed, complicated grief can have significant negative consequences. These include mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, and suicidal thoughts. It can also increase the risk of physical illness and substance misuse, while negatively impacting daily life, relationships, and work. Now that you understand the difficulties of grief, let's talk about grief's connection to Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This ties significantly into the narrative of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, explaining the entirety of the game's plot and all the characters involved. Clair Obscur translates to light, dark, or twilight, or balance. It's the French equivalent of chiaroscuro, an art technique originating during the Renaissance period, widely utilized in both Renaissance and subsequently Baroque art. Traditionally, chiaroscuro creates drama and adds dimensionality through the stark contrasts of light and dark. In the world of Clair Obscur, it represents everything, from the landscapes to the characters themselves. Life inherently contains both light and darkness, and is typically within balance. And this narrative explores the balance within each person, particularly how grief alters that delicate equilibrium. let's start with the story of the game before we dive into the meat of what's really going on. In Clair Obscur Expedition 33, the game immerses players in a visually stunning, yet hauntingly tragic, yet beautiful universe, delicately poised between breathtaking beauty and imminent destruction. Here, the romantic allure of art contrasts sharply with an unsettling reality. A yearly phenomenon orchestrated by a mysterious entity known as the Paintress. Annually, the Paintress inscribes a cryptic number on an enigmatic monolith, a countdown causing individuals whose age matched the chosen number to mysteriously dissolve into petals, a horrifying occurrence termed gommage, or erasure in French, signifying the erasure of said individuals. Determined to halt this tragic cycle, dedicated expeditions journey each year towards the monolith to confront and defeat the Paintress. Expedition 33's journey begins immediately after one such devastating event. Upon arrival, they are unexpectedly ambushed by an enigmatic elderly figure, appearing far too ancient to be human, who ruthlessly eliminates most of the expedition members. Gustav, surviving by chance, finds himself overwhelmed by despair. In a moment of despair, and at the brink of taking his own life, he is stopped by Lune, who reignites his purpose. Gustav and Lune soon discover clues and eventually a note leading them to Gustav's adopted sister, Mekel, sheltered in the north under the guardianship of a mysterious being known as the Curator. Reuniting with Mekel and Ciel, another survivor found in the Gestural village, the four-member team presses forward. Their journey introduces them to beings straight from Lumiere's mythical lore. They meet Noko, a Gestural who advises them to seek Chief Golgra, and the whimsical Eske, who holds the key to crossing the sea. Although Eske initially demands a favor, which is retrieving a cherished stone from his cranky neighbor, Francois, he ultimately aids them in their quests, which, unfortunately, tragedy swiftly returns as Gustav is caught off guard and ultimately sacrifices himself to protect Mekel from the white-haired assailant.
For those who come after. Right?
Just before Mekel is harmed, an unexpected survivor named Verso intervenes, who not only saves but ultimately dramatically alters the group's destiny. Verso reveals himself as part of Expedition Zero. The original explorers granted immortality by the Paintress's mysterious power. He identifies their attacker as Renoir, his former leader, who believes ending the Paintress's existence would also terminate his own immortality, compelling him to betray Lumiere's people. United with Verso, the expedition intensifies. The narrative deepens when the group battles Renoir, discovering that Verso is Renoir's own son. And amidst the turmoil, Mekel encounters a masked girl whose revelations of a catastrophic fire that destroyed Mekel's family only deepen their confusion and emotional turmoil. Armed with a powerful weapon from the Curator, Expedition 33 confronts the Paintress at last. After an intense confrontation, the Paintress strangely ceases hostility, heals the team in what seems to be a way to beg the team to stop their mission, and ultimately succumbs, leaving behind cryptic final words. Returning triumphantly to Lumiere, the expedition's joy abruptly ends as the monolith's destruction emits a shockwave, erasing the city's inhabitants. Mekel awakens in a memory from her past, realizing her true identity as Alicia, part of a magically gifted painting family known as the Desange. The world they've struggled to protect is revealed as a canvas crafted by her deceased brother Verso, into which their grieving mother Aline had retreated. Their father, Renoir, had entered the canvas to save her, leading to a prolonged conflict. Recognizing the tragic consequences, Alicia and her sister Clea resolve to rescue their parents. Yet when Alicia enters the canvas, she becomes lost within, transformed into Mekel, forgetting her true self and being reborn. Restored to her memories, Mekel learns that the Verso who is in the painting is nothing more than a mere illusion of the real Verso, created by Aline, the paintress, and ultimately their mother. She then allies with Verso to challenge Renoir, striving to maintain the canvas independently of Aline's grief-driven interference. Renoir resists, prompting Mekel to resurrect fallen comrades, building an army to reclaim Lumiere. Ultimately, Mekel and her allies succeed, expelling both Renoir and Aline. In a transcendent space bridging reality and art, Mekel and Verso encounter the heart of the canvas and the original Verso's soul, forever committed to sustaining his creation. Here, conflicting ideals arise. Verso desires to free the remaining part of the original Verso's soul, which is enslaved to painting the canvas and unable to pass on, as well as wanting an end to his own false life through the canvas's destruction. While Mekel wishes to preserve it, giving the reason that the people and beings of the canvas deserve to continue to exist, but in reality, her motivation is purely her fearing giving up her brother, who she feels responsible for his death, and the loneliness of going back to the real world and living her life as a woman who was scarred due to the fire and left unable to speak. Their profound conflict leads to divergent outcomes. This is ultimately where you must make a decision as a player, based on the information that you've gathered throughout the story. Do you side with Mekel, or do you side with Verso? That choice ultimately comes down to you and where you feel you align, your morals, your beliefs. Because ultimately, in this story, it's a tragedy. And there are no right or wrong answers here. There is no black and white. This is literally Clair Obscur, light and dark, twilight, balance. So let's talk about the choices that you make should you side with one or the other. Let's talk about that. If you decide to side with Mekel and she prevails, she secures the canvas's eternal survival. Despite Verso's desperate pleas against prolonging his existence, life flourishes in Lumiere, with her having revived Gustave and Emily, as well as Ciel's husband Pierre, and what seems to be a young boy who could be either the soul of Verso or possibly her own child or one of Gustave's apprentices. Yet, an aged Mekel observes an aged Verso who performs a melancholic piano melody, which embodies the endless cycle of inherited grief trapped in her mother's footsteps. The dangerous cycle continues. Alternatively, choosing Verso's path, Mekel's defeat brings a poignant farewell, reminding her of her power to craft new realities. Verso wishes her off to return to the real world, the tangible world. And there, Alicia and her family commemorate Verso, unified in grief, yet finding strength in one another. After each family member says their goodbyes and finds their own way to cope with their grief, Alicia lingers, comforted by the fleeting visions of her canvas-bound companions, symbolizing hope through acceptance, sadly, rather than her initial thoughts of just using the escapism to stay in the painting. And now that we've covered the story, let's touch on the backstory, the backdrop of this family tragedy that honestly explains in depth what's really going on here, and touches on the story's main themes of grief, tragedy, nihilism, existentialism, and what it means to exist. The crux of this story is centered around the Desandre family. The Desandre family was loving prior to the tragedy that befell them, headed by Aline and Renoir, talented painters whose abilities allowed them to craft entire worlds inhabited by sentient beings. Though their artistic gift was extraordinary, it posed dangers. Losing oneself within one's creation was a significant risk, Aline especially emphasized the importance of balancing real life with their painted worlds, a lesson passed down to their children, Clair, Alicia, and Verso. Each child responded differently to painting. Clair was naturally gifted, quickly surpassing Aline. Alicia preferred literature over painting, lacking substantial artistic skill compared to her siblings, and also was quite well at writing. Verso was, well, he had little interest in painting, yet he was talented but found himself favoring music instead. He created just one canvas world, deeply personal, and embedding a fragment of his soul within it, as painters typically put their souls into the canvas of whatever they paint. Unfortunately, family tensions arose when Verso and Alicia pursued paths outside of painting, frustrating Aline and causing strain between her and Renoir. Eventually, Aline allowed Verso to explore music after his single canvas, a decision that unintentionally paved the way for tragedy. On December in 1905, the Writers' Faction, rivals opposed to Aline's leadership, targeted the Desandre family by manipulating Alicia's passion for writing, orchestrating a devastating fire. Now, we have to understand that the details do remain unclear, but the event resulted in Verso sacrificing his life to save Alicia, who suffered severe burns and permanently lost her voice. The emotional scars ran deep. Aline and Clair unjustly blamed Alicia, particularly Aline, who withdrew entirely, unable to face her daughter due to her hatred for her. To escape her overwhelming grief, Aline retreated into Verso's canvas, recreating her family within it. Her grief and bitterness influenced these painted versions. Renoir became the opposite of what he was in the real world and was darker and violent, reflecting how Aline viewed him in her grief. Alicia bore permanent scars, forced to wear a broken mask, and not being able to speak, which is a constant reminder of tragedy and Aline's desire to punish her for the death of Verso. And Verso became idealized yet emotionally hollow. Clair rejected Aline's depiction of herself, using her skills to erase and repaint herself, underscoring their fractured relationship. Renoir followed Aline into the canvas, initiating an ongoing conflict. Unfortunately, Aline trapped Renoir beneath a painted monolith, sustaining the canvas's artificial reality by force. Clair intervened, creating the Nevrons to prevent Aline's chroma from returning, indirectly aiding Renoir. And despite the imprisonment, Renoir would erase the older inhabitants, destabilizing the world in an event called the Fracture, symbolized by a countdown from Aline's wooden mannequin. Verso's canvas became a battleground reflecting Aline's grief and denial. Later, Alicia, reborn as Maëlle within the canvas, attempted to save her family but experienced repeated trauma mirroring real-life losses, including losing her surrogate brother and father figure, Gustave. Each Desandre member was unable to cope with their grief, and instead of coming together to cope and heal, they each fell into their own hells. Aline's destructive escapism painted Verso's hidden truths, Alicia's willingness for self-sacrifice, and Clair's emotional detachment. Renoir, despite his actions, was driven purely by his desire as a father and husband to save his remaining family, with the ends justifying the means. Verso's painted existence was deeply painful, characterized by isolation, betrayal, and longing for release. Aline's attempts at preserving what little she had left of her son inadvertently condemned him to continuous suffering. In truth, facing Aline was not for the sake of Lumiere or the expedition for Verso, or painted Verso that is. It was to save the remaining soul of the real Verso and to cease his own false existence. Consumed by grief, Aline failed to recognize the damage she caused to not just the canvas world of Lumiere, but her living, real-world family, Her final act, shielding an expeditioner during their final confrontation, possibly signified remorse or acceptance of her destructive legacy, or it could also be a tactic of manipulation, as those who grieve and refuse to face it often become selfish and manipulative to continue on with whatever allows them to continue their escapism. Seeing Alicia unscarred possibly illuminated what truly mattered, potentially offering Aline a brief moment of clarity and temporal acceptance of her grief, and a desire to be forgiven by the daughter that she abused and hated. Returning to the story's climax, it presents a profound choice: destroying the canvas for authentic healing or preserving the artificial world. Both choices involve significant sacrifice, reflecting life's ongoing balance of light and darkness. Thus, Clair Obscur. In the climactic finale, after an intense and emotionally charged battle, Renoir and Aline are decisively defeated and compelled to leave the painted canvas world they once inhabited and shaped. With the battle's conclusion, Mekel and Verso embark on an introspective journey through a mysterious and ethereal space, suspended by the tangible reality and the illusionary canvas world. It is here, within this surreal and intermediary realm, that they encounter a deeply haunting and symbolic figure, a young boy, relentlessly and endlessly painting upon a canvas, seemingly unaware of anything beyond his task, and unfortunately, not wanting to continue to paint, but being forced to. This figure represents the very soul of Verso, tragically trapped within his own creation, since the moment of his death, tirelessly laboring to sustain the existence of the world he once lovingly crafted. His endless, repetitive painting symbolizes his unending burden and the heavy toil of his eternal duty, reflecting the profound loneliness and suffering resulting from his inability to move beyond the canvas. During this profound encounter, Verso passionately voices his desperate yearning for release from this eternal cycle. His heartfelt plea underscores his desire to finally destroy the canvas, viewing this act as the only possible path toward genuine peace and liberation from his relentless suffering. Conversely, Mekel fiercely opposes Verso's wishes, driven by her profound fear of returning to the stark loneliness and overwhelming grief awaiting her in the real world. For Mekel, preserving the canvas is vital, representing not just her escape, but also the preservation of the cherished world and relationships she formed within it. This fundamental divergence in ideals and desires inevitably ignites a powerful and emotionally charged confrontation between the two characters. Each passionately defends a respective vision of the future of the canvas, highlighting the intensity of their emotional investments and the complex nature of their intertwined destinies. Their heartfelt arguments underscore the profound moral ambiguity and emotional complexity inherent in their conflicting goals, leaving the player deeply moved and contemplative. This final, emotionally charged confrontation ultimately leads to two distinct and profoundly impactful endings. Neither outcome is explicitly framed as definitively good or definitively bad, each presenting significant emotional costs and compelling moral questions. Should the player align themselves with Mekel, she ultimately triumphs over Verso, ensuring that the painted canvas world, along with everyone within it, continues to exist, and also continuing to enslave and condemn Verso's soul to paint on the canvas against his desire to. Yet before succumbing to defeat, Verso desperately pleads with Mekel, begging her not to paint him again, an anguished request that poignantly emphasizes his deep longing for genuine liberation from an existence that he finds unbearable and artificial. The aftermath of Mekel's victory transitions the narrative back to the town of Lumiere, now bustling with vibrant life energy, and activity. Within the lively and resurgent community, Mekel and her companions, including Gustav, find themselves seated in the ornate opera house, witnessing an emotionally rich and reflective performance. An older Verso, visibly aged and carrying a heavy burden of sadness, and looking angrily at the piano and passively at Mekel for seeking her own desires over his dying request to let him go and move on and to save the soul of the real Verso, steps onto the stage, preparing for a piano recital. This powerful and symbolic moment encapsulates the nuanced emotional complexity of the ending, leaving the audience with a resonant sense of melancholy, contemplation, and profound empathy for the sacrifices and emotional struggles endured by the characters. On the flip side, choosing to side with Verso will have you facing Mekel and defeating her, leading to her return to the real world. SK and Monaco arrive and embrace Verso, accepting their fate and being happy to spend their final moments with the shadow of their creator and friend before gommaging themselves. While the remaining expeditioners arrive to see Verso destroying the canvas and thus their world, Ciel and Verso stare at each other. Verso reaches out to her as she simply accepts her fate of gommage yet again for the second time, and fades, while Lune angrily looks at Verso's second betrayal and sits and watches and waits for the end to come. We are then shown Mekel, now in the real world as Alicia, with her family, Aline, Renoir, and Clair, standing over the grave of Verso and finally coming together to accept his death and try to move on. Renoir and Aline stare at each other somberly, in a way that they probably haven't looked at each other in a long time. Renoir eventually goes on to hold Aline, who is truthfully the most destroyed by facing the reality of the loss of their son. Clair sets flowers on Verso's grave and stares at her family before walking off. Alicia is left alone, holding on to a toy version of SK, and sees a vision of those she loved from the canvas world as they wave to her and fade away, allowing her to move on with her real life, possibly alone, again. Clair Obscur thoughtfully examines tragedy, existentialism, the trolley problem, survivor's guilt, and diverse responses to grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and ultimately acceptance, highlighting unaddressed sorrow's destructive impact. Aline epitomizes grief's consuming nature. Renoir embodies sacrifice, and the ends justifying the means. Clair illustrates emotional hardening and withdrawing into oneself. Alicia symbolizes unresolved trauma's devastating effects. Painted Verso and the remaining soul of Verso symbolizes both suicidal ideation and for his family to stop fighting and come together and heal. Collectively, they underscore the necessity of authentically addressing grief. When it comes to the French culture's usage of Clair Obscur, also known as Clair Obscur, which will be for many gamers as uncomfortable due to the genre's reliance on decades-old tropes and story beats, with Drakengard, Nier, Castlevania Lords of Shadow, and Xenogears being some of the exceptions here. Clair Obscur is used in its totality in the game beyond a namesake, with its powerful lighting technique characterized by strong contrast between illuminated and shadowed areas within the scene. This method serves to heighten drama, enrich visual storytelling, and evoke specific emotional responses. Through deliberate manipulation of light and shadow, filmmakers transform two-dimensional visuals into dynamic three-dimensional scenes, enhancing depth and captivating visual interest. The stark contrast between darkness and illumination can provoke unease, anticipation, and mystery. This is particularly impactful in genres such as film noir, thrillers, and horror films, where tension and suspense are crucial. Clair Obscur highlights characters by selectively illuminating aspects of their faces or bodies. This visual emphasis can reveal inner conflicts, emotions, and moral complexities. For instance, partially shadowed faces often symbolize internal turmoil or ambiguous morality. The strategic use of dramatic lighting establishes and reinforces a film's overall mood, whether creating the gritty realism of a crime drama or the tense uncertainty of a thriller. By thoughtfully positioning highlights and shadows, filmmakers guide viewers' eyes to critical elements within the frame, effectively emphasizing essential narrative decisions or actions. The interplay of light and shadow frequently symbolizes deeper thematic elements, such as good versus evil, knowledge versus ignorance, or hope versus despair, enriching the narrative with layered meaning. Stark contrasts enhance themes of crime, moral ambiguity, and pervasive darkness, visually echoing the genre's narrative complexities. Chiaroscuro effectively heightens dread and tension, using shadows strategically to conceal and gradually reveal terrifying imagery, thus amplifying the viewer's sense of fear. In dramatic storytelling, Clair Obscur emphasizes pivotal emotional moments, making scenes visually striking and emotionally compelling, thereby deepening audience engagement. And its use within this game is just absolutely breathtaking. Ultimately, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 beautifully mirrors Chiaroscuro's stark contrasts, exploring humanity's struggle with grief profoundly. It challenges our perceptions of reality and emotional attachment, emphasizing life's necessity despite suffering. Through its narrative richness, Clair Obscur deeply resonates, offering profound insights into grief's complexity, beauty, and transformative power. When one falls, we continue. For those who come after. Right.
I want to thank you for making it to this part of the video. I know time is such a essential thing, and it's difficult for a lot of us to take time out of our day to watch a 30-minute video, let alone a 15-minute one or ones that are longer than that. But thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video, and hopefully this video helped you not only come to appreciate Clair Obscur Expedition 33 more, but also have a better understanding of not only the plot of the game, but also of Clair Obscur as its origin, its original usage. I also want to thank people that were very influential in helping make this video possible. Chief amongst them, Lehua Superfina, thank you so much for just helping out with this video. I also want to thank my good friend Chris Sharps, who did the introduction monologue and narration. And if you're not familiar with Chris Sharps, you should be. He's the voice of Billy Khan in Fatal Fury, City of the Wolves, and many, many other projects. Thank you, Chris, for making this possible. I also want to thank my other friend, Rebecca Rose, who you guys know as the voice of Mai Shiori Nui and Street Fighter 6, as well as Fatal Fury, City of the Wolves, for contributing to this project as well. So with all that being said, thank you guys for being part of it. I also want to touch on another aspect, which is, well, my own personal touches and embraces with grief. So I can understand characters like Aline, Renoir, Alicia, Verso. I can completely understand them. I personally have gone through substantial loss in my life. My first child passed away at the time of this recording about 16 years ago. And I know what it's like to not know how to process that grief. So if I was able to have a canvas to paint and go into it, to spend more time with my daughter that passed, I would, because I understand that pain. I understand the way that Aline handled things, but I also understand Renoir as well, of we have to face it and go back to reality. And the beauty of this game is how it showcases how each and every single one of us handles pain differently and grief. So I understand. For my baby girl, Kaylee Ray Jaslyn, you would be 16 going on 17 if you were still here. It's not a day that goes by that I don't miss you. And I wish you could see your sisters and your siblings that are here. So, with that being said, people, thank you for watching this video. Cherish your loved ones. If you're dealing with depression or substantial grief, seek professional help. It's worth it. I've been in therapy for 15 going on 16 years. And it's a very, very powerful thing. So, all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Let me know if you like this video. And yeah, peace out. And ahuyo, as we say here in Hawaii. See you guys on the next one.